The red bicycle lay on its side in the driveway, its training wheels still spinning slowly in the autumn breeze. Detective Sarah Martinez crouched beside the small bike, her latex gloves catching the late afternoon light as she examined the scene that would haunt her for decades to come. The handlebars were turned at an odd angle, and a single Pokémon card had fallen from the basket, now damp with morning dew despite the fact that 7-year-old Tommy Brennan had vanished on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, just 24 hours earlier. The Brennan house stood like a monument to suburban normalcy on Maple Street, white picket fence, manicured lawn, and a tire swing hanging from the old oak tree in the backyard. But beneath this veneer of perfection, something sinister had taken root. Margaret Brennan sat on her front porch steps, her eyes red and swollen, clutching a small Superman action figure that still smelled faintly of her son's bubble bath. She had called Tommy's name until her voice gave out, had run through every neighbor's yard, had checked every hiding spot in their modest 2-story home. The boy had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation began like all missing child cases do, with hope tempered by growing dread. Officer James Kowalski, a 15-year veteran of the Cedar Rapids Police Department, had arrived first on the scene. The call had come in at 4:47 p.m., a frantic mother reporting her son missing after he failed to return from playing outside. The officer's initial notes, scrawled in his weathered notebook, captured the essential details that would later prove crucial. Tommy had been playing in the front yard with his bicycle around 3:30 p.m. when his mother went inside to start dinner. She had checked on him every 10 minutes through the kitchen window, a ritual she performed religiously since moving to this quiet neighborhood just 6 months earlier. Margaret Brennan had moved to Cedar Rapids from Chicago after her messy divorce from Tommy's father, seeking a fresh start in a place where her son could ride his bike without fear, where neighbors knew each other's names, where children could still play outside until the streetlights came on. She had chosen this house specifically for its proximity to Lincoln Elementary School and the small playground 2 blocks away. The irony was not lost on Detective Martinez as she walked the perimeter of the property, noting the clear sight lines and the absence of any tall fences or hedges that might provide cover for an abduction. The first 48 hours of any missing child case are critical, and the Cedar Rapids Police Department mobilized every available resource. Search teams combed the nearby woods that bordered the suburban development, their voices echoing through the trees as they called Tommy's name. Bloodhounds were brought in from the state police, their sensitive noses picking up the boy's scent trail that led from the front yard to the sidewalk, and then simply stopped, as if the child had been lifted into the air. The local news station ran Tommy's photograph every hour on the hour, a smiling gap-toothed boy with sandy brown hair and bright green eyes, wearing his favorite striped t-shirt and grass-stained jeans. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation took on the methodical rhythm that marks all long-term missing person cases. Detective Martinez interviewed every resident on Maple Street and the surrounding blocks, creating a detailed timeline of everyone's whereabouts on that Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Henderson from across the street had been tending her garden and swore she saw Tommy riding his bicycle in circles on the driveway around 3:45. The mail carrier, Frank Rodriguez, remembered delivering a package to the Brennan house at approximately 4:00 p.m. and noticed the boy's bicycle but didn't see Tommy himself. These small details became the building blocks of an increasingly complex puzzle that seemed to have too many missing pieces. The investigation expanded beyond the neighborhood, as detectives explored every possible lead, no matter how unlikely. Tommy's father, David Brennan, became an immediate person of interest, despite living 300 miles away in Chicago. The divorced father had a solid alibi. He was in meetings at his law firm all afternoon, and had dozens of witnesses to corroborate his whereabouts. Still, investigators scrutinized his phone records, his financial statements, and his recent communications with his ex-wife. The divorce had been acrimonious, with bitter disputes over custody and child support, but nothing in David's background suggested he was capable of harming his own son. The registered sex offenders in the area were systematically investigated, their alibis checked and rechecked. 3 men within a 5-mile radius of the Brennan home had to account for their whereabouts that Tuesday afternoon. One was at work at a local auto parts store, confirmed by security cameras and multiple witnesses. Another was in the hospital recovering from surgery, his presence documented by medical records and nursing staff. The third, a man named Robert Kemp, who lived alone in a rundown trailer 6 miles away, initially couldn't account for his afternoon but was eventually cleared when investigators discovered he had been at a probation officer meeting 40 miles away, his attendance verified by official records. As autumn gave way to winter, the case began to consume Detective Martinez's life in ways that concerned her superiors and worried her family. She worked 16-hour days, following up on every tip that came through the police department's hotline. A psychic from Des Moines claimed to have visions of Tommy trapped in a basement, leading to the search of dozens of properties throughout the county. A truck driver swore he saw a boy matching Tommy's description at a rest stop near Iowa City, prompting a multi-state alert that ultimately led nowhere. Each false lead chipped away at the family's hope, while adding to the mounting frustration of the investigative team. The psychological profile developed by FBI behavioral analysts painted a picture of the perpetrator that was both detailed and disturbingly vague. The abduction appeared to be opportunistic rather than planned, suggesting someone who was familiar with the neighborhood and Tommy's routine. The lack of physical evidence at the scene indicated either careful planning or incredible luck on the part of the kidnapper. The profile suggested someone who lived or worked in the area, someone who had observed the Brennan family and identified Tommy as a target of opportunity. This person was likely a white male between the ages of 25 and 45, with a history of antisocial behavior and possibly previous encounters with law enforcement. Margaret Brennan's life unraveled slowly, like a sweater with a pulled thread. She took an extended leave of absence from her job as a school nurse, unable to concentrate on caring for other people's children while her own remained missing. She stopped sleeping in her bedroom, instead curling up on the living room couch where she could see the front yard through the window, hoping against hope that she would see Tommy's small figure walking up the driveway. Her sister moved in from Minneapolis to provide support, but even family could not fill the gaping hole left by her son's absence. The first break in the case came 4 months after Tommy's disappearance, on a cold February morning, when a cross-country skier discovered a child's shoe buried in the snow near a hiking trail 15 miles from the Brennan home. The shoe's location revealed something troubling about the kidnapper's mindset. The hiking trail where it was found was not easily accessible and required local knowledge to navigate, especially in winter conditions. This suggested that whoever had taken Tommy was familiar with the area's geography and had likely spent considerable time exploring the remote locations where evidence might never be discovered. Detective Martinez studied topographical maps late into the night, marking potential search areas and trying to think like someone who needed to hide evidence of a terrible crime. Spring brought new hope and new horrors to the investigation. As the snow melted, additional items began to surface throughout the county. A child's sock was found near an abandoned grain elevator, 20 miles south of town. A small toy car, which Margaret identified as one of Tommy's favorites, was discovered by a farmer plowing his field 8 miles west of the original search area. Each discovery was both a blessing and a curse, proof that Tommy had been in these locations, but also grim confirmation that he was likely no longer alive. The pattern of evidence distribution painted a disturbing picture of the perpetrator's movements in the weeks and months following the abduction. Detective Martinez created a detailed map, plotting each discovery, looking for connections that might reveal where Tommy had been taken or where his body might eventually be found. The scattered nature of the evidence suggested either random disposal or a deliberate attempt to confuse investigators, but the detective's instincts told her there was a method to this madness that she hadn't yet deciphered. As the one-year anniversary of Tommy's disappearance approached, a new development breathed life into the stalled investigation. A construction crew renovating an old farmhouse 30 miles from Cedar Rapids discovered what appeared to be a makeshift prison in the basement, a small room with reinforced walls and a heavy lock on the outside of the door. The property belonged to Walter Griggs, a 62-year-old retired mechanic who had lived alone since his wife's death 5 years earlier. Neighbors described Griggs as a quiet man who kept to himself and showed little interest in community activities, though some recalled seeing him at local school events, despite having no children or grandchildren of his own. The investigation of Walter Griggs revealed a carefully constructed facade, hiding a deeply disturbed individual. His computer contained thousands of images of missing children from across the Midwest, meticulously catalogued and organized in folders labeled with dates and locations. His workshop in the barn contained detailed maps of several counties, with elementary schools and playgrounds marked with red pins. Most disturbing of all, investigators found a journal documenting his observations of various families, including detailed notes about children's routines, their parents' schedules, and the security measures at their homes. The journal entry, dated 2 days before Tommy's disappearance, was particularly chilling. The Brennan boy plays outside every afternoon around 3:30. Mother is distracted by household chores. Street is quiet. Maple Street presents opportunity. The methodical nature of his planning revealed a predator who had been stalking potential victims for months, studying their habits and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Griggs had died of a heart attack 6 months after Tommy's disappearance, taking his secrets to the grave and leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The basement room in his farmhouse contained traces of DNA from multiple sources, though the degraded condition of the evidence made definitive identification impossible with the forensic technology available at the time. What was clear was that children had been held in that room, and the scratches on the walls suggested they had been there for extended periods. The discovery of Griggs's involvement provided closure of sorts for Margaret Brennan, though it came with the devastating confirmation that her son was almost certainly dead. The scattered evidence found throughout the county suggested that Tommy had been moved multiple times during his captivity, possibly as Griggs became increasingly paranoid about discovery. The location of the basement prison, 30 miles from town on a property surrounded by dense woods, meant that Tommy's body could be anywhere within a 100-square-mile area. Detective Martinez continued searching for 2 more years, following up on every possible lead and coordinating searches of properties throughout central Iowa. The final piece of Tommy Brennan's story emerged on a hot summer day 3 years after his disappearance, when a group of teenagers exploring an abandoned quarry discovered human remains at the bottom of a limestone pit, 40 miles from Cedar Rapids. The remains were those of a young child, and DNA testing confirmed what everyone had feared but hoped would never be proven. They had found Tommy Brennan. The condition of the remains and the location suggested he had been placed there many months earlier, possibly during the winter when the quarry was frozen and inaccessible to casual visitors. Margaret Brennan finally laid her son to rest on a crisp October morning, exactly 4 years after his disappearance. The funeral was attended by hundreds of community members who had never forgotten the little boy with the gap-toothed smile. Detective Martinez stood at the back of the church, her eyes scanning the crowd for any face that seemed out of place, still hoping against hope that some clue might emerge even at this late date. She had never stopped working the case, even as other investigations demanded her attention and her superiors suggested it was time to move on. The Tommy Brennan case changed how Cedar Rapids handled missing children reports, implementing immediate response protocols and community alert systems that might have made a difference in 1989. Detective Martinez eventually retired from the police force, but she never stopped thinking about the boy whose disappearance had defined her career. She kept his case file in her home office, occasionally reviewing the evidence and wondering if there were other victims of Walter Griggs who had never been found, other families who deserved the closure that had taken 4 years to reach the Brennans. The red bicycle that had started it all was eventually donated to a local charity, but not before Margaret Brennan had it completely restored to the condition it had been in on that last day. Her son rode it in their driveway. She wanted other children to experience the joy Tommy had felt riding that bike, even as she knew that no amount of giving back could fill the emptiness left by his absence. The house on Maple Street was sold the following spring, and new families moved in, their own children playing in the same yard where Tommy had spent his last moments of freedom. Years later, when Detective Martinez was asked about the cases that had affected her most deeply, she would always mention Tommy Brennan first, not because it was the most complex or challenging investigation she had handled, but because it represented everything that was fundamentally wrong with a world where children could simply vanish from their own front yards. The case had taught her that evil could hide behind the most ordinary facades, that monsters didn't always look like the demons of children's nightmares, and that sometimes the greatest tragedy was not the crime itself, but the way it forever changed everyone it touched. The story of Tommy Brennan serves as a reminder that behind every missing child poster, every Amber Alert, and every news report about an abduction, there is a family whose world has been shattered in ways that can never be fully repaired. His disappearance highlighted the vulnerability of children in an increasingly dangerous world and the dedication of the investigators who never stop searching for answers, even when those answers bring more pain than peace. In the end, Tommy Brennan came home, but not in the way anyone had hoped, and his story continues to echo through the halls of the Cedar Rapids Police Department as a reminder of the cases that matter most, the ones that involve protecting the most innocent among us.